Hi folks, Jill Jedlicka here from Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. Let's talk Scajaquada Creek during Scajaquada September. We asked our community for a bunch of questions about what they want to know about Scajaquada Creek, and boy did we get a list of questions. So here we go. All right. Question number one, can you kayak in Scajaquada Creek? Well, I think the real question here is, can you kayak or should you kayak? The answer is yes and no. Probably wouldn't recommend it just because there's a lot of hazards and still ongoing pollution and sewage overflows that are happening. But on a dry day, on a nice day, if you want to be adventurous and not flip your canoe or kayak, you can paddle maybe in the lower section. It is a navigable waterway, so you are able to access it, but use caution. Okay, question number two. I live in Cheektowaga and heard some news about the creek where it goes through the town park. What is happening there? Well, yes, Scajaquada Creek goes through Cheektowaga Town Park. It's actually been manipulated and modified to be part of the flood control project that was implemented by the Army Corps of Engineers in direct correlation to the Galleria Mall and having control of the flooding that comes off of those surfaces. If you've ever been to Cheektowaga Town Park, you'll see the creek. It's nice and perfectly straight, which is not necessarily what we want our creeks to look like. But through Waterkeeper's work with the Army Corps and the town of Cheektowaga and many of our partners, we are looking at opportunities to improve that habitat, reconnect the creek to its floodplain, and make it a little bit more natural resource for the residents of Cheektowaga. So, all right, here's a question. How polluted is the creek, and will we ever be able to swim in it? This is another question with the answer of it depends where you are in the creek. If you are in the lower creek, unfortunately, you are downstream of a lot of the sewer overflows that occasionally happen into the creek system. It's also the industrialized section of the creek where there is some legacy pollution there in the sediments. When you go into the headwaters area in Lancaster and Cheektowaga and Depew, it's a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit safer for both wildlife and people. I would not swim in this creek system right now, but it is the goal of the Clean Water Act and the work that we do to make everything fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. So hopefully in the next 10 years, when we revisit this question, I will be able to say, yes, please go ahead. You can have contact and go swimming in the creek. But right now, I would not swim in this creek. All right, next question. What fish are in the creek? Well, this is a good one. We've seen lots of different kinds of fish species through the years of our work. We know that bluegills are in there, and sunnies, and largemouth bass, and we've actually seen steelhead trout try to make a run up Scajaquada Creek, and we've actually seen them through Forest Lawn Cemetery, and some of the really hardy souls of those steelhead trout have tried to make it up the Scajaquada tunnel in the drain. I don't think that they've made it as far as they would have liked, but we do know that the fish are trying to utilize that creek system for spawning and for thriving, and it's because there is actually some natural spring waters that feed into the creek system. So if we clean it, if we restore it, fish and wildlife will come because they are there already. Here's a question that says, what happened to the alligator found in Scajaquada Creek years ago? Scajaquada Jack, who could have forgotten about Scajaquada Jack? Roughly 2001, I think it was this whole escapade for days of somebody had released what was then thought to be a caiman, but turned out to be an alligator, into the creek system, and it was this whole chase and trying to track it down and capture it, and it just consumed the community for a while, where people were out trying to look for Scajaquada Jack, just like as if it was Loch Ness Monster or something like that. But the alligator was captured and eventually sent down to an alligator reserve down in Florida, and we think he lived out his days there. I'm not quite sure what happened to Scajaquada Jack after that, but at least it was a good story here back in 2001. Okay, next question. Can you fish in the waters of Scajaquada Creek? The short answer is yes, you can fish. You can do catch and release anytime. This is one of the great recreational assets that we have in our region, whether it's White Lake or sections of the creek. But we do caution folks not to necessarily consume the fish that they catch. There's certain species that could be pulling up contaminants into their bodies. There's certain populations that are more at risk if you consume fish, such as women of childbearing age or those under 16. We do recommend that you look at the New York State Department of Health fish consumption advisories to understand which species are acceptable and which are not. But in general, I just would not eat fish caught from Scajaquada Creek right now. All right, so here's a historical question. where did the name Scajaquada come from? Well, there's lots of different stories out there. The one that is most commonly repeated and that we've heard is that there is this person known as Philip Conjacquity, and he was part of the Seneca Nation. He was known as the last survivor of the Neutral Nation here in Western New York, and it was just a play on his name. So Conjacquity over the years was kind of changed to the Scajaquada term that we use today. Another question about, will any of the underground parts be brought above ground? This is a great question, and we've been answering and trying to answer this question with the community for decades. For those who don't know, Scajaquada Creek is buried underground for at least 3.5 miles between Jedlicka through the east side of Buffalo and where it pops out at Forest Lawn. It's also buried underground in little sections up near the Galleria Mall. And in the recovery attempts for this creek system, we're often asked, can you daylight the stream? Can you bring the creek back above ground? We're not quite sure that's possible yet. There still has to be a lot of studies and engineering analysis done. First off, we don't want to tear apart communities that have already been reestablished once that creek was underground. We don't want to expose people to health hazards by doing that. And it also has to be cost effective. So these are all conversations that we're having right now within the communities and with local leaders. And stay tuned, and maybe in 50 years we'll have a creek that's daylit again, maybe not. So the next question is the creek really under the Galleria Mall? Well, it's not under the mall itself, but the creek is rerouted and under some of the parking areas and parking structures of the mall. The headwaters are in Lancaster, kind of flows through Depew and in parts of Cheektowaga. And where the Galleria Mall was put in the ground, it's actually on top of some historic wetland complexes that were there. And in order for the mall to be stabilized and be built there, they had to kind of channelize the water system into a creek, and they had to reroute the creek under certain areas that were developed. So the answer is yes and no. The creek is underneath some of the parking structures, but not under the mall itself. Okay, so this question, another historical question. Why did they bury the creek and when? And so that is not an easy question to answer in about 10 seconds because the creek was repeatedly buried in different iterations of time between the 1920s and the 1970s. But the common theme with this is that the creek was buried because it was easier to bury the creek than it was to restore and clean up the contamination in the creek, which is really a sad state of things, but that's kind of what we've inherited from previous generations. So when the creek was determined to be a health hazard, it was easier to bury it in pipes underground to protect human health because the creek itself was used as for industrial discharges and sewage, receiving sewage waters. Some of that activity still happens to this day, but we see remnants of areas of the creek that are buried underground throughout the entire watershed. All right, here's a question, final question. What's being done to improve the creek? Well, there's a lot that's being done right now. It may feel like we talk about how polluted Scajaquada Creek is all the time and everything that's wrong with it, and it really is an example of what not to do to a creek system. But that's like 150 years of history, and it takes a long time to understand which part you can move and improve upon and what can be done first, and what can be done in a way with the community. So in order to improve the creek, we need to be able to engage the community in these conversations. And Waterkeeper right now is working with a lot of our municipal partners and our agency partners, and we actually have established a community advisory group that we've been working with over the last couple of years to really dive in and understand what does a community want to see out of a restored creek system, how can we improve the habitat, how can we improve the water quality, and we want to do this all together. So that is in process right now. That's in addition to work that's already been done. So if you want to see what can be done, go take a look at Forest Lawn Cemetery and the wetland and creek restoration work that we've done there. Take a look at all the people recreating along the shorelines, and just get involved, and you'll be able to understand and see more progress that isn't so obvious all the time. All right, I think that's all the questions we had. Are we done, Adam? Did we miss anything?
Do you think you could spell Scajaquada with your eyes closed?
Scajaquada with my eyes
So you don't look at the paper?
Okay. Capital Scajaquada. Oh, I opened my eyes.
That's all right, you got it. You weren't looking at anything.
Okay,
Anyway. Perfect.
All right, we'll take that as a win.